Hello, good morning, and welcome to the brand new podcast, Titanic Legacy, a creative collaboration between the Titanic Book Club and Cove Pod, the Carganilla online variety entertainment podcast. This is a new show in which we'll explore Titanic's lasting impact through conversations with creators, artists, authors, historians, filmmakers, and more who continue to produce creative work inspired by the Ship of Dreams. I'm your host, Paul Carganilla. Today's guest is Clifford Ismay, author of the book Understanding J. Bruce Ismay, the true story of the man they called the Coward of Titanic. And to everyone tuning in at home, doing chores, driving to work, working out, however you're listening, thank you for listening and welcoming us into your lives for the next half hour or so as we talk about Titanic and her long-lasting creative inspiration and impact. This is Titanic Legacy, the podcast. Now, as I mentioned, the book we're talking about today, it's described as an insight into the man at the heart of the world's most infamous maritime disaster. And I'm going to read straight from the back of the book here. For over 100 years, J. Bruce Ismay has been the scapegoat of the Titanic disaster. He is the villain of every film and TV drama, a fit and able-bodied man who sacrificed the lives of women and children in order to survive. Some even claim that it was his fault the Titanic sank, that he encouraged the captain to sail faster. But is this the true story? In Understanding J. Bruce Ismay, Clifford Ismay opens up the family archives to uncover the story of a quiet man savaged by over a century of tabloid press. This is a must-read for any enthusiast who wishes to form their own opinion of the Titanic's most infamous survivor. Thank you so much to Clifford Ismay for joining us today. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello, Paul. Hello, everyone. I'm great, thanks. It's nice to be here, and I'm honoured to be invited to take part in the show. Thank you.
Oh, so honored to have you, and thanks to modern technology. I'm here in Southern California in the States, and where are you joining us from?
So I'm speaking to you from the west coast of Cumbria, which is on the fringe of the English Lake District. We're enjoying some lovely weather here too. Probably not quite as warm as it is there, but never mind, the sun's shining and that's good enough for us.
Oh, yes, very good. Always nice to have the sun out, and it's been an interesting year weather-wise for us, especially in Southern California. It's been very rainy and cloudy. Even now, we're recording this in almost the end of May, and we're still waiting for that sunshine. But glad you're having a great day. Now, we'll just jump into your connection here. Obviously, we're going to talk about your book, but for anyone listening, we're talking about J. Bruce Ismay, and your name is Clifford Ismay. So what's the relation there?
So J. Bruce Ismay is my fifth cousin, twice removed, given the generations apart, of course. That's his father, Thomas Henry Ismay, was the fourth cousin, and the book is partly about Thomas Henry as well. But yeah, a lot of people. So I'm not kind of a direct descendant. A lot of people think I am. It's not actual direct descendant of Bruce. Unfortunately, on his particular lineage, the family name died out. But I'm from a few generations before him, from a slightly different lineage, but the connection's there.
So tell me about your connection with the Titanic. Was that something that you knew growing up, or is it something you found out about later?
Yeah, from about 8 years old, I think. I was sitting at home with my father watching the TV, all black and white in those days, and A Night to Remember came on the TV. So I was watching it with my father, and I saw this huge ship sailing across the North Atlantic. I just looked at my father and said, "Wow, Dad, look at the size of that ship." He said to me, "Do you know you're related, son, to the man that owned that ship?" Well, of course, Bruce never actually owned the Titanic per se, but it was good enough for the mind of an 8-year-old at that time. And I just kind of got involved with the whole Titanic scene from then on.
Very good. And would you say that you then, after learning that, became super interested in it? Were you reading up on it, watching as much as you could, documentary-wise, things like that?
Yeah, I think that didn't happen until maybe about 1912, when I was starting to kind of step back from my working life a little bit. So that gave me more time to look into the Titanic, and I collected huge files on the Titanic and Bruce, and I think it was about maybe mm, 8 years ago. While I was doing talks and presentations, I decided to write a small book about Thomas and Bruce, which I would take to the presentations, just self-published stuff, and they sold very well. So at some point, I thought, well, I think it's time to move on to something better, and I just kind of collaborated all the files that I gathered over the years and came up with this.
Very good. And so, what inspired is that? Would you say that is what inspired the book?
No, I wouldn't, to be honest. That was the very first short effort that I made. But um, I think what inspired the book was, I would say, I would meet people for the first time, perhaps watching Cliff Ismay, and some of them that were into the Titanic story would say to me, "Oh, are you related to the coward of the Titanic?"
Oh,
Of course, my answer would be I don't believe there were any cowards on board the Titanic. But yes, if you're talking about Bruce, I'm related to him. And then I found that was the narrative that everyone was following, a thread that no one had ever really challenged before. So I thought it's time for someone to look into all these stories about Bruce, trying to sort of disseminate fact from fiction. And I thought, well, who better to do it than a relation of his? And I think that's what inspired me, really.
I love. Before I get into it, I just wanted to give a shout out to everyone watching live on the YouTube live stream on the Titanic Book Club. If you have any questions for Clifford, please go ahead and ask him. I'll be monitoring the live chat while we're having this conversation. And hello to RMS Atlantic Queen 2 of the Seas and Charlotte for saying hello in the chat. So I was going to mention that one thing I really love about the book is all of the letters that you found that you actually included to him and from him in the book. How did you get your hands on those?
Okay, so that was it. That's an interesting story in itself. So, a relation of mine who happens to be Bruce's great grandson heard I was collecting information. He called me. He said, and this was news to me actually. He said, Cliff, come up and visit me. He said, I have archive upon archive of letters, photographs, etc., etc. And you can have access to them if you want to use them for the book. And I travelled up to, I'll go as far as say to Scotland, where he lives, and spent a couple of days with him. And I was taken aback at the amount of information that he had there. Um, so yes, I uncovered all these letters, diary entries from Bruce's mother, etc., etc. Quickly taking photographs of all of them, and after the 2 days in Scotland, I came back home and started to read up on everything and trying to gather information from all the letters. And what I found was completely upturning the story of Bruce in all kinds of respects.
Yeah, because as the back of your book that I read earlier does explain, like he is really villainized in a lot of the presentations that you see. This obviously the memorable scene portrayed so well by Jonathan Hyde in the movie, the '97 movie, and where he just slips into the lifeboat, and very similar scene in A Night to Remember as well. And it's really a shame that like this moment of his life really defined his legacy. One of the things that I really love about your book is that for most people in their mind, the story of Bruce Ismay begins on the Titanic, but there's just so much to understand about him before the Titanic is ever even built. And a lot of the history in your book just gives a really great backstory on who he is as a man. Was there anything that specifically surprised you to learn about him and his history?
I didn't realize how shy a person he was in his childhood, and how that followed him through into his adult life. Um, so as piecing things together, I began to know and understand J. Bruce Ismay a lot better than I had done previously. I think the biggest surprise for me was the the circumstances around his retirement, because I, like everyone else, thought that he'd retired from the presidency of the International Mercantile Marine, being the parent company. I thought he'd retired from there as a direct result of the Titanic disaster. And I was actually surprised to learn that his retirement was set into motion about 3, 4 months before Titanic actually left Southampton. And it was delayed. It was actually going to retire before Titanic sailed, but it was delayed because his successor, Harold Sanderson, wasn't quite ready to take on the role yet. So I was amazed when I learned that.
And that's another thing too, is people, I think people who don't know a whole lot about Titanic assume that he was on board as like working as a member of the White Star Line staff, but he actually held a first class ticket, and he didn't really have a lot of say. There is the scene in James Cameron's movie where he's urging Captain Smith to go faster. Wouldn't it be great if we got in the night before, make the front pages, right? But there's no proof that that ever happened, and he was actually on the ship in the capacity of being a passenger.
That's correct, because Bruce followed the same guidelines as his father always did. Whenever possible, he always sailed on the maiden voyages of any of the White Star Line ships. The purpose being that he just wanted to kind of look around and see how things could be improved. If there were any problems that the passengers, that the crew might find on the ship, and work on improvements for it. Regarding the speed, well, that's often a bone of contention with many people. But I actually found evidence that Bruce Ismay issued an order to Captain Smith for Titanic, regarding Titanic speed, that Titanic must not reach the Ambrose Lighthouse before the appointed time. Now, there's no evidence showing that Captain Smith actually received the letter. The only letter is that the letter was drafted to Captain Smith. So I think that kind of tells you from that Bruce really didn't want Titanic to get in any faster. I mean, Titanic was a luxury liner. It wanted people on board to enjoy the comforts of the ship for the duration of the voyage. It was never about speed. There were other ships that were much faster than Titanic, and it was just about cruising. That's what he wanted, and he was very diligent in his timekeeping. Even during work at the office, if a member of staff had an appointment to see Bruce in the White Star Line office, there's a tail lad who would actually sit in the seat outside the office, waiting to knock on the door at exactly the appointed hour. Otherwise, Bruce wasn't very happy. So yeah, I believe that he really did have no plans to get into New York ahead of time.
And I like that you mentioned he would go on the maiden voyages to see what could be improved for the next one. I believe he was on the Olympic, making notes and seeing how we could improve for the Titanic. And he and Thomas Andrews really worked to provide top of the line services for their guests.
And yeah, that's what it's all about with the White Star Line. It was a top class service. not just for the first and second class passengers, but also for the third. Um, the White Star Line on most of the ships provided more comfort and space for the third class passengers than any other liner did. I mean, Titanic, they had hot and cold running water in the rooms, which is something a lot of them didn't even have at home. They had electricity, which for some of them it was a novelty. The third class passengers they hadn't even seen electric lights before. So he really wanted everyone to feel comfortable on board the ship on the journey between Southampton to New York and vice versa.
That memorable line from the dinner scene on Titanic where Rose's mom pokes at Jack and says, "How are the accommodations in steerage?" And he says, "Best I've seen, ma'am. Hardly any
Yeah,
rats." But it's true. Like Titanic,
true.
it historically, factually had like the best third class experience you could get at that time.
It did. Even in the third class dining room, the tables had tablecloths, which was something that, simple thing like that, but it was something that most of the ships didn't provide for what they called steerage. I don't like to use the word steerage, but that's what it was called at the time, for the steerage passengers. Knives, forks, I mean, some of them would just get a fork. They didn't have a knife to cut the food. Um, they didn't have the cutlery laid out in they did have the cutlery laid out in a way that was to be expected from any White Star Line vessel. They were given every comfort that could be afforded to them for the price of the ticket that they were paying, I believe.
So interesting. And you mentioned earlier how shy of a man he was, and I'm always interested in. And with this podcast, of course, is through the Titanic Book Club, and I also, like to explore. When I pick up a book, so a little bit about me, my history as I went to school for theater, and I dreamed of being an actor, but so I've always been so interested in what makes people tick. And whenever you're playing a character, you're not just playing the emotions in the scene. You have to be informed by the history of the person. And so when you mentioned earlier, like he was shy, he's not, the character as portrayed by Jonathan Hyde in the movie is very strong and confident. And, but the real J. Bruce Ismay was actually not at all like that.
No, that was kind of what we would call top show. So he was so shy that he began to create like an atmosphere around him of boraskness. And he used to be short with people sometimes because that was an attempt to hide his shyness. And it really was only those that were very close to Bruce that understand that the way it was. I mean, some people found him a bit arrogant, I think, because again, it was his way of hiding his own shyness. He wanted to dominate his job. He was the chairman of the White Star Line, president of the IMM, and he needed to come over as in that persona that would be expected. But he found it very difficult. And those were the ways that he used to try and show that.
Almost like he's playing a character of himself,
Yeah.
to hide how shy he was. I
Mhm.
was reminded a lot of, I don't know if you're familiar with the NFL, and Bill Belichick, the Patriots head coach for many, many years, always just very brash and short answers with the press. But anybody who knew him personally would say he's a teddy bear. Like he is
Yeah.
not at all who he is when he's in front of a camera.
Well, I try. I don't. I've been on the other side of the pond, of course. I don't really know much about this guy, but yeah, it's a trait that many people have, and they try to hide it. I mean, who wants to come over as a shy, cowering person? Well, okay, be yourself, be what you are, is what I always say. But I suppose in that line of business, it just doesn't work, and you have to find a way of hiding it and come over as someone a bit more positive and assertive.
And something I found super interesting was and what it kind of is such a symbolic moment in his life was the racehorse story. Can you tell us about that?
And now there's a couple of racehorse stories, but if you're referring to the one when he was A teenager.
Hmm.
Um, there was his father was a very keen on race horses, and they had stables at home, uh, very large stables. And Bruce Ismay one day came home from the office as an apprentice. He came home uh, an hour or so before his father, and he just felt the urge. He wanted to get his father's racehorse and ride it along the sands of Crosby Beach near Liverpool in England. And I think he got a little bit overexcited with himself. He tried to drive the racehorse too fast. Unfortunately, the racehorse fell and broke its leg and had to be destroyed. And it's something that Bruce never really got over. I mean, I suspect he was probably heavily berated by his father. First of all, he shouldn't have took the horse without asking, and secondly, he shouldn't have been so racy with the horse, and so in irresponsible. I think is the word. But however, he did it, and it was a while after that before he would even look at a horse. But very very sad.
The amount of guilt, and I just thought it was so symbolic. Like, he's driving his father's prized possession too fast, as people
Mhm.
would say, and then it gets destroyed, and he has to live with that guilt.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
just the way the rest of his life went is just such a, oh man, it's just so symbolic of that. Um, so tell me about, if you could, as had you written a book before this one?
No, just a small version of this particular book. I hadn't actually written a book before this. This is my first published work.
And
Find it very enjoyable.
I was just going to ask, how um, would you describe the process as a first time author? Was it more difficult than you expected it to be when you were going into it, or was it kind of just what you thought it might
You
the
know,
experience might be?
it was kind of what I thought the experience might be. In fact, I think in some ways it was a lot easier because being my first book, I was doing a lot of research on getting the book published. Um, and the internet was telling me, well, if you're a first-time author, you're more than likely going to have to go through an agent who will contact a publisher, and you'll probably get many, many letters of refusal from agents before you even get accepted, if you ever do. Um, I think I was very lucky in a lot of ways. So I didn't go through an agent. I thought to pop with that, I'm going to try and do it directly. So I approached the history press, and they asked me to send a synopsis of the book. And once they're ready, they said, "Hey, yeah, we'll take you on." However, I must say that I did have a very strong recommendation from George Behe, who was an established author with the History Press, and he did give me a recommendation for which I'll be forever grateful. But yeah, they took me up straight away. I was very lucky.
Very good. What was your favorite part about putting the book together?
Getting to know Bruce, I think. Um, Obviously, the more information I collated, the better I would get to know Bruce. The more surprises were coming up, um, and I think that was it. It was forming the image of Bruce in my mind's eye, and getting to know him that way. Obviously, it was fun going around different places collecting the information. I think since the book. I think life's been equally exciting with all the podcasts and interviews and everything else that goes along with it. So, I've found it a great experience, and I would recommend everyone, if they're thinking about it, give it a shot.
Very good. And that's one thing that I really love about this community is how, eager everyone is to talk about it, and how open and willing everyone is to connect within this Titanic community online. And if you're on Instagram, you can find Cliff at Ismay_Titanic. That's how I got connected with him. I reached out and sent him a message. I said, hey, Amazon's out of your book. Where can I get it? And you were so kind to sign one and send one to me. And I'm sure he would do the same for you out there, everyone. He mentioned it is published by the History Press, but where do you recommend people get it when they ask?
So, to be honest, you can get it just about anywhere now. Most people source it from Amazon. If you're in the States, Barnes and Noble in the UK. Well, all the main outlets really, WH Smith, Waterstones, etc., etc. So it's well stocked in many places, and I also sell my own personal editions with the signed certificate. So I sell like limited number editions, which come with a signed certificate and bookmark, etc., what I call the collector's editions. And if anyone wants one of those, they can contact me through email at ismay.author@gmail.com. And I can certainly arrange to send them a copy.
Very, very cool. Are there plans for any future books?
I could be tempted. I'm considering 2 books at the moment, which I can't really talk about. Both Titanic related. One is about a certain group of the crew members, which really hasn't been gone into yet. That's as much as I can say. Okay. And I'm thinking about writing a book on 2 of the White Star ships that preceded Titanic as well. So there are 2 in the pipeline and possibly another one, 3rd one in the thought process right now.
Very good. One thing that, jumping back into this book in particular, I found really interesting was, as you kind of touched on earlier, a lot of people, as I mentioned, like just when they think of Bruce Ismay, they think of Bruce on the Titanic. And you do such a great job at laying the base foundation of his life before Titanic. But then, as mentioned on the back of the book, people don't realize what happened, or there's so many misconceptions about his life after. What surprised you the most, other than you mentioned already his retirement that he had been planning, but what would you say is the biggest myth that you like to dispel about his life after the Titanic event?
Well, I think the big myth about Bruce Ismay during his retirement was, as we've covered before, he left because of the Titanic disaster, which of course he didn't, but that's the myth that goes on. The other myth is that once he retired, he lived the life of a recluse. He went to live in Northern Ireland, completely shut himself off from the public eye. Yeah, no, sorry, not on Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland. He did go to Ireland, and the reason he went there was because at the end of the day, he was retired from the International Mercantile Marine. He wanted a quiet place to spend his summer days. He loved fishing, and that particular part of the west coast of Ireland was renowned for its salmon and trout fishing. But during the winter months, he would come back to his home in London, and he would conduct his other businesses with the shipping canals, insurance companies. He was also a director of the London and Northern Railways, which took up quite a bit of his time. So, to say that he lived a life of a recluse, no, he was certainly very active until he fell into ill health around about the beginning of the 1930s. And that's of course when his life took a change for the worse.
Absolutely fascinating, and so much information. I had no idea. It was such a pleasure to dig into your book. I certainly recommend anyone who hasn't yet pick up your copy of Understanding J. Bruce Ismay, the true story of the man they called the Coward of Titanic. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, Clifford. Is there any last takeaway that you'd want to share with the audience before we say goodbye?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously, I hope that people will read my book, but I hope really that people will, whether they read my book or they get it from other sources, I want people to understand the true story of Bruce, not just go with the narratives from the movies, TV documentaries, etc. Do some research, and you will find that really Bruce was not the person that is portrayed to be.
And that research, that whole story, can be found right here in the
It
book.
can,
And
indeed.
thank you so much for sharing it with us, for doing the work and sharing Bruce's real story. Thank you for spending time with us, Cliff. And thanks to, I want to give a big shout out to Jill Carlier. She's in church right now, but and the Titanic Book Club. Thank you so much. Be sure you're subscribed to the book club on YouTube if you're not yet and you enjoyed this episode. Please, whatever podcast platform you might be listening on, please subscribe, rate, leave a positive review. That'll help us so much. And if you love conversations with creators, click over to my personal podcast, Cove Pod, and give that a listen. I speak with lots of inspirational storytellers, musicians, everyone who's making great stuff and following their heart's fire. I want to say thank you one more time to our guest, author Clifford Ismay. Be sure to find him on Instagram at Ismay_Titanic. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next episode, please remember, seize the day, follow your heart's fire, and make each day count. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everybody.